The sword smelled like oil and old leather, and it had no business being this far from Earth. Darien Vale kept it wrapped in dark cloth, tied with 2 strips of cord, tucked behind his seat in the cargo hauler like it was nothing. Spare parts. Extra boots. Nothing worth looking at. He had carried it that way for 11 years across 9-star systems and never once been asked about it by anyone who mattered. That changed on Varith Crossing. The station was the kind of place that swallowed people. 3 kilometers of layered decks, pressurized markets, docking arms that reached out like fingers into black space. Every species with a trade license and a grievance passed through Varith Crossing eventually. It smelled like recycled air, fried food from a dozen worlds, and money being lost. Darien had been on the station 4 days when Soru's people took his cargo. It was done through paperwork. That was the Veldran way. Soru was tall even by his species standards, with 6 limbs, pale gold skin, and the kind of smooth, patient voice that sounded reasonable right up until the moment you realized your contract had 3 clauses you never agreed to. He had filed a dispute with the station's trade authority before Darien's ship even finished docking. By the time Darien understood what was happening, the cargo had been transferred, his hauling fee had been frozen, and he owed a fine on top of it. Darien sat through the trade authority hearing without raising his voice. He answered questions. He showed his original contract. It did not matter. The arbitration board had 2 Veldran members and 1 Garathi who had been bribed, and that was that. Sora walked out with everything. Darien walked out with a number in the negative column and enough credits left for maybe 6 days of docking fees. He went to the nearest bar and ordered something cheap. The bar was called the Low Deck Tap. It was the kind of place where the lighting was always a little too dim and the stools were designed for 4 different body types and comfortable for none of them. Darien sat at the end of the counter with his bag on the floor between his boots. The sword was in the bag. He was on his 2nd drink when Soru's associates came in. There were 3 of them. They were not Veldran. Soru hired locally too. Thervani and a Korati who worked as muscle and entertainment, respectively. They spotted Darien the way that kind of person always spots someone they have already beaten, like checking on a finished job. They were loud about it. Comments in 2 languages Darien understood and 1 he did not need to understand because the tone was plain enough. One of the Thervani, the shorter one, leaned over and grabbed the strap of Darien's bag, just to see what he would do. Darien looked at him, said nothing, and held the strap. The Thervani pulled. The bag shifted. The cloth wrapping inside slid, and the cord on one end came loose, and the hilt of the sword appeared in the gap. The Korati stopped laughing first. He tilted his head and looked at it. The Thervani let go of the strap. For a moment they all just looked. Then the laughter came back, harder than before. It spread. The bartender looked over. 2 Veldran at a nearby table craned their necks. The Korati said something loud in his own language and pointed, and the bar filled with the specific kind of laughter that crosses species. The kind that does not need translation. A steel blade. Single edge. Leather grip worn smooth by decades of hands. Old engravings along the flat that nobody there could read. Sitting in a bag. On a bar floor, far from the world where it had been made, belonging to a species that most of the station considered a minor footnote in galactic history. Darien wrapped it back up and tied the cord. Old family thing, he said, to no one in particular. A small gray hand set a drink in front of him. He looked up. A Korati woman. Not the one who had been laughing, a different one, sitting 2 stools down. That he had not noticed. She had 4 eyes, the outer 2 a pale silver. She wore a medical observer's badge on her collar. You did not react, she said. No. To any of it. The ruling. Them. The laughing. She studied him with all 4 eyes the way doctors study things. Most humans react. Reacting doesn't get the cargo back, Darien said. She told him her name was Eula. He told her his. They sat quietly for a while. She asked him about the blade, and he told her, briefly, it had come from his grandfather, who had gotten it from his grandfather, and it had been in continual use for over a century before that. She asked if it was ceremonial. No, he said. She asked what it was, then. He thought about it for a moment and said, a solution. He did not explain. She did not push. It was another hour before Soro himself appeared. He stood in the doorway of the bar with his 6 limbs arranged in the loose, satisfied posture of someone who owns the room. He looked at Darien. He said, at a volume for the bar to hear, that the humans still owed a secondary filing fee and that if he could not pay it by the end of the station week, Soro would be claiming his ship. Darien's ship was the last thing he had. There was a way to settle debts on Vareth Crossing outside of Trade Court. There had always been a way. The Grand Arena had been operating for 200 years for exactly this reason. Darien set his drink down. File for about, he said. The bar went quiet. Sori looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. He said he would be happy to arrange it. Eula looked at Darien. Darien looked at his drink. He did not look worried. That, Eula thought, was either the mark of a very competent man or a very foolish one, and she had been a doctor long enough to know the difference was not always obvious from the outside. She flagged the bartender for another round, and Desi. Word moved fast on a station with nothing better to do. By the time Darien walked into the Arena Authority's registration office the next morning, there was already a crowd outside the building. Not inside. The office itself was small, functional, and smelled like old data terminals. But outside, pressed against the transparent wall panels, a mix of species stood watching the way people watch a fire that has not gotten serious yet, but might. The registration clerk was a Garathi. Old species, old station. The Garathi had been running this particular institution for 160 years. This one had a name badge that read Overseer Drath and a face that had seen enough arena business to be unimpressed by most things. He processed Darien's paperwork without comment until he reached the weapon declaration field. He read it. He read it again. 1 blade, he said. Non-powered. Single edge. Steel. Pre-space construction. Planet of origin. Earth. That is correct, Darien said. Drath looked at him the way someone looks at a form they suspect has been filled out incorrectly, but cannot find the error. He stamped it. Arena rules. Were arena rules. Any personal weapon a combatant arrived on station with was a legal weapon. Drath had once processed an entry for a being who fought with a sharpened agricultural tool. He had seen stranger. He posted the registration to the public board and said nothing more. The declaration was public within the hour. By midday, the betting boards had adjusted. Darien's odds against were 40-1. Someone on the lower decks started selling small novelty items, little stamped metal shapes that looked vaguely like swords. They sold out in 2 hours. Darien found out about the odds from a young man named Brennan, who found Darien eating alone in the docking sector cafeteria and sat down across from him without being invited. Brennan was 22 and worked dock cargo. He was lean, dark-haired, and had the specific kind of nervous energy that came from being young and in a place that was larger than anything he had planned for. He had been on the station 8 months. He had recognized Darien's name from a freight registry and followed him here because he had not spoken to another human in 3 weeks and was running out of excuses to keep not speaking to one. He told Darien about the odds. He thought Darien should know. Darien thanked him and kept eating. Brennan asked if he could help. He meant it sincerely and had no particular skills to offer. Darien looked at him, considered this, and told him he could act as his corner second during the bout. It was a formal role medical relay. Equipment carrier, time between rounds communication. Brennan said yes before he finished the sentence. Sora's champion was posted to the public board that afternoon. The name was Gorak Thervani. Professional arena record of 14 bouts. 12 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss that the notes described as a technical ruling, rather than a genuine defeat. Gorak's listed weapons were 2 vibro lances. High-frequency blades that disrupted molecular cohesion on contact, capable of cutting through most commercial-grade armor as cleanly as air. His physical stats listed 4 functional arms, scaled hide rated at significant impact, resistance, and a reach advantage over most humanoid species. Brennan read the posting on a public terminal and went to find Darien. He found him in the prep hall beneath the arena's east entrance, a long, low-ceilinged room with lockers and benches that smelled like machine oil and old sweat. Darien had his bag open on the bench and was unwrapping the sword. Brennan had not seen it fully before. He stood in the doorway and looked at it. It was not impressive in the way arena weapons were supposed to be impressive. It did not hum or glow or have an edge that caught light dramatically. It was a steel blade, slightly curved, about 70 centimeters from guard to tip. The leather on the grip was worn almost smooth. There were characters engraved along the fuller that Brennan did not recognize, old and shallow from years of cleaning. The metal itself had a matte gray sheen, not a mirror finish. It looked like something from a museum. Darian set it across his knees and took out a small cloth and a flat tin of oil. He opened the tin, touched the cloth to it, and began cleaning the blade in long, slow strokes from base to tip. Brennan told him about Gorik's vibro lances. Darian nodded. Brennan asked if he had ever used the sword in a real fight. Darian kept the cloth moving along the blade. He said yes. Brennan asked how many times. There was a pause. Darian's hand did not stop. He counted something quietly, in a way that suggested the counting was internal. Then he wrapped the blade back in its cloth, tied the cord in 2 places, and set it carefully beside him. He did not answer the question. Brennan opened his mouth, closed it, and sat down on the bench at a respectful distance. He did not ask again. Eula arrived at the prep hall an hour before lights out. She had been assigned as medical observer for the bout, a rotating staff position, and had confirmed the assignment herself by trading her scheduled rest rotation with a colleague. She told her colleague it was a favor. This was only partly true. She found Darian alone. Brennan had gone to sleep. She sat down across from him and told him, plainly and without softening, what a vibro lance did to organic tissue at close range. She told him what Thervani's scaled hide could absorb. She told him that in 60 years of arena medicine she had treated beings who had underestimated Thervani fighters, and that most of them had needed significant reconstruction afterward. Darian listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he asked her one question. He asked where the joint gaps were in Thervani scale coverage. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she told him, wrist interior, inside of the elbow, the neck, on the left side, where the scale ridge had a natural seam from the shoulder plate, the knee, from below, at an angle. She described each one precisely, because she was a doctor and precision was what she did, and because something in the way he asked the question made her understand he would actually use the information. He thanked her. She left without wishing him luck. She was not sure yet whether he needed it. The prep hall was quiet after she went. Darian sat with the wrapped sword across his knees and did not move. He did not practice. He did not stretch or pace or shadowbox the way arena fighters usually did the night before a bout. He just sat still. If you had watched him from the doorway as Brennan did, briefly, at some point past midnight, before going back to his bunk, you might have thought he was sleeping, but his eyes were open. He was looking at the middle distance, with the flat, settled attention of someone who has already decided everything they need to decide and is now simply waiting. The station's overhead lights cycled toward their night setting. The prep hall dimmed. Darian sat with the sword in the dark and the sound of recycled air, and whatever he was thinking, he kept it to himself. Nobody came to watch Darian win. That was important to understand. The grand arena of Varith Crossing held 4,000 bodies on a full night, and by the time the bout was scheduled to begin, it was close to 3,800, the largest crowd for a minor dispute bout in recent memory. They were not there for the outcome. They were there because someone had put a steel sword from a pre-space species into the registration board, and word of it had gone through the station like a current, and nobody wanted to miss the moment the human embarrassed himself in front of an audience. The vendors in the upper concourse were doing excellent business with the novelty blades. Gorik entered first. The arena knew how to handle a professional. The announcement was long, the lights were dramatic, and Gorik moved through the entrance corridor with the easy, heavy gait of something that had done this many times and found it uncomplicated. He was large even for a Thervani, nearly 2.5 meters for armed, his natural scale covering supplemented with articulated combat plates over the shoulders and chest. The vibro lances were carried in his lower 2 hands, currently unactivated, their emitters dark. The crowd made the sound it made for professionals. Then Darian entered. He came through the gate with no announcement and no dramatic lighting because he had not paid for either. He wore what he had been wearing, dark work. Trousers, a plain jacket with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, boots with worn soles. The sword was in his right hand, unsheathed, held loose and low. At his side, he did not wave or acknowledge the crowd. He walked to the center line of the packed sand and stopped. The laughter started in the upper tiers and moved down. It was not mean in the way that individual cruelty is mean. It was the impersonal laughter of a crowd that has decided collectively that something is funny. The novelty blades got held up. Someone in the third tier shouted something in Veldran that Darian did not know and did not need to. Brennan, standing at the corner post with the medical kit and a water flask, watched the crowd with an expression that sat somewhere between fury and nausea. Darian did not react to any of it. He stood on the sand, sword at his side, and watched Gorik the way you watch a piece of machinery you are trying to understand. Overseer Drath raised one hand from the officiating platform. The crowd noise dropped to a manageable level. He spoke the formal opening of the bout. In 3 languages. He lowered his hand. Gorik activated the vibro lances. The sound was immediate, a high, cycling shriek, 2 frequencies out of phase with each other. The air around the blades blurred slightly, heat distortion at a few centimeters. In the arena, lighting the emitter edges glowed a faint violet. Gorik moved them in a slow, deliberate pattern in front of his body. It was not combat yet. It was display. It was meant to produce a specific response. Darian took 1 step to the left and set his feet. The crowd, expecting retreat, got silence instead. Gorik treated the first exchange the way a skilled professional treats an obvious mismatch, efficiently, without cruelty, but without full engagement. Either. He crossed the distance in 6 steps and threw 2 testing strikes. Not committed, wide, designed to watch how the target moved. The lances screamed through the air. The sound of them was physical, something you felt in your back teeth. Darian moved. Not a dramatic leap. Not a dive. He was simply not where each strike arrived, by a margin so small it looked either calculated or lucky and was too fast to tell which. His feet moved in short, flat steps, weight centered, the sword staying close to his body. He gave Gorik nothing, no opening, no angle, but no counterattack either. Just movement. Gorik paused. He recalibrated slightly, the way professionals do when a target behaves unexpectedly. He pressed harder. The next sequence was real combat. Gorik stopped displaying and started working. Forearms gave him angles that 2 armed species had to compensate for, and he used them, driving Darian backward across the sand with overlapping strikes, upper and lower lances crossing in patterns that left very small windows of space. Darian moved through the windows. He was not winning. He was surviving, which was different, but the crowd had expected him to be dead by now, and he was not, and that difference was enough to begin changing the sound of the arena. The laughter at the top tiers had gone quiet, replaced with something more attentive. People who had been watching to laugh were now watching to understand. Gorik landed one. The lance caught Darian across the upper left arm, a glancing contact, not full edge on, but enough. He spun with it rather than against it, stumbled 2 steps, caught himself. A long cut opened through the jacket sleeve, and the skin beneath. Not deep. Significant. His left arm moved differently after that, slightly guarded. The crowd surged. Gorik moved in to finish the first stage clean. He did not see what Darian's feet were doing. The human had not been retreating. He had been positioning. There is a difference, and it is invisible if you are watching the weapon and not the feet. And Gorik, like most arena fighters, watched weapons. Darian stepped inside the reach of the lower lances, close enough that their effective cutting length was useless. In the narrow space between his body and Gorik's plating, the sword came up in a short, controlled stroke, not a slash, not a dramatic swing. A placement. The tip found the inside of Gorik's left wrist joint, exactly where the scale coverage had a seam. It was a shallow cut. The blood was dark and immediate, and the arena went silent. Not quiet silent. The kind of silence that falls when 3,800 beings all update the same assumption at the same moment. Gorik looked at his wrist, then at Darian, then at the blade. The sword had found the gap in 4 seconds of real engagement, on a species. Darien had never fought, in conditions he had never trained for specifically. It had found it because someone had spent a long time teaching him to look. Brennan's hands had stopped shaking. He was standing very still at the corner post. Eula, from her medical station at the arena's edge, was watching Darien, with all four of her eyes for the first time since the bout began. Gorik lowered his lances. Then he raised them again, not in defeat, in reappraisal. The professional had just been reminded that this was, in fact, a real fight. The arena held its silence like a breath it had not decided to release. Darien settled his feet into the sand. The sword was at his side again, easy in his hand. He waited. There is a memory that comes back to Darien sometimes in the middle of fights. He is 12 years old and standing in a small yard behind a house on Earth. It is raining. His grandfather is standing across from him, barefoot in the wet grass, a wooden practice sword in one hand. The old man has a prosthetic. Left hand dark metal, simple joints, something he never bothered to upgrade. Beyond functional. He is pointing at Darien's feet. Again, he says. Not the blade. Never the blade first. The feet. Always the feet. Darien had done the footwork drills for 8 months before his grandfather. Let him hold the real sword. 8 months of stepping, turning, pivoting, learning to move his weight without announcing it. By the time the sword came into his hands, his feet already knew the geometry of a fight. The blade was just an extension of a decision his body had already made. He had asked, at some point in those 8 months, why they still trained this way. There were better weapons. There had been better weapons for decades. His grandfather had looked at him for a long moment and then said, "The sword teaches you to think in a space about this wide." He held up his hands, maybe a meter apart, with everything happening faster than your head can follow. Nothing else teaches that the same way. Not a gun, not a stick. The sword. You can put it down later, but you can't unlearn it. Darien never put it down. In the arena, Gorik came back with everything he had. The gladiator was not unintelligent. He had processed the first exchange and drawn a correct conclusion. The human was trained, was faster than his size suggested, and had been given specific information about Thervani anatomy. The wrist cut was not luck. The wrist cut was knowledge applied at the right moment. Gorik's adjustment was to use reach and power and not let Darien get inside. Again, he drove forward with both upper lances in a crossing pattern, wide and fast, forcing Darien to move laterally rather than straight back. The lower lances tracked where the lateral movement would end. It was a good tactic. Against most opponents it would have worked. Darien went up. Not far. Not a jump. He stepped onto a small raised section of the arena. Floor a stone marker, flat and barely ankle-high, that he had clocked when he walked in, and Gorik had not thought about it all. The extra centimeters changed the angle of the lower lance sweep by enough. He came off it moving sideways, changed direction once, and was inside the guard again. Another memory. He is 20 years old, in a training hall with worn floors. His instructor is a woman who moves like water and has broken 3 of Darien's fingers over the years, always by accident, always with an apology, never with a change in what she was teaching. She tells him, "You will be smaller than most things you fight. Stop trying to match them. Use the ground. Use the angle." A smaller person who controls the geometry of a space beats a larger person who doesn't know what geometry means. Darien had been the smallest person in that training hall for 2 years. He had won the most bouts. The sword came around in the close space and found the inside of Gorik's elbow, upper left arm joint gap, exactly as Eula had described it. The cut was deeper this time. Gorik's upper left lance dropped. He fought with 3 now. 3 was still more than most opponents carried. Gorik was still bigger, still faster in pure linear movement, still armored where Darien had skin and fabric. He caught Darien with a shoulder strike that was not a weapon move at all, just mass, directed forward. It hit like a wall. Darien went sideways and down, one knee in the sand, and the arena made a sound like an exhale. He stayed down for 2 seconds, not recovering. Positioning. Gorik was already moving over him for the finish. The sword came up from the sand at an angle that was not a slash and was not a thrust. It was something between the two, a movement that did not have a clean name in any language Gorik knew. because it belonged to a system that had been developed over 1,000 years on a world Gorik had never visited, by people solving problems Gorik had never had. In the close quarters of that moment, in the narrow space between the ground and Gorik's descending weight, the blade moved 3 times. The sound it made was the sound in the title. Steel through air, fast and precise, and without wasted motion, a high, clean tone. Not quite a whistle, not quite a ring. Something between the two. It was quiet by arena standards. It was the quietest thing that had happened in the fight. But the arena was no longer making crowd noise, and so it carried. It carried to the upper tiers. It carried to Eula at the medical station. It carried to Brennan, who had both hands wrapped around the corner post and did not know he was holding his breath. It carried to Soru in his private box, who had been watching with the comfortable expression of a man observing a formality. He was no longer comfortable. His 6 limbs had drawn slightly inward, which was a Veldran physical response to uncertainty that he would have controlled if he had been paying attention to his own body. He was not paying attention to his own body. He was watching what the blade was doing. Gorik staggered. He did not fall. His mass and his armor and his training kept him upright. But the right side of his body was not responding the way it should, and one of the remaining lances had gone dark when his grip changed. And he was standing still in a fight for the first time since it began. Standing still in a fight was how you lost. He knew it. Darien knew it. The arena knew it. Darien came up out of the sand with the sword at his side. He was breathing harder now. The shoulder hit had taken something. There was blood on his jacket from the earlier arm cut, and a spreading bruise across his ribs that would need attention. His left arm still moved carefully. None of that changed his feet. They were exactly where his grandfather had taught them to be. He waited. He had learned, a long time ago, to let the other person decide when it was over. Gorik made one more decision, and it was the wrong one. Not a bad decision by any standard a reasonable fighter would apply. He was still standing. He had 3 functioning limbs, and 2.5 of them held weapons. His hide had absorbed 2 cuts that would have ended a lesser being's ability to continue. He still outweighed Darien by several hundred kilograms. The math, if you counted mass and reach and remaining weapons, still looked like his fight. He charged. It was the right instinct against most opponents. An injured, smaller being, running out of energy, already hit twice. One arm compromised. You close the distance fast and end it with pressure. Most things break under enough weight moving fast enough. The problem was that a charging opponent commits to a line. Darien had been taught this the same year he was taught to do footwork in wet grass. A charge is a gift if you know how to receive it. It tells you exactly where the other person is going to be. They have made their decision. You just have to make yours first. He made it. He did not step to the side the way most beings would. He stepped at a diagonal, forward and across, which put him briefly in Gorik's path before. Sliding off it to the right, counterintuitive, shorter to travel, and it changed the angle of everything. The lance that Gorik swung in came down. Behind him, Darien was already rotating. The sword found the gap at the left side of Gorik's neck, between the scale ridge and the shoulder plate. Not deep. It did not need to be deep. It needed to be accurate, and it was, because Eula had told him exactly where the seam was, and Darien had kept that information in the same place. He kept everything that mattered. Gorik's legs stopped working correctly. He went down to one knee. He stayed there. His remaining lance dropped from fingers that were sending signals. His nervous system was temporarily unable to complete. His other arm came out to brace against the sand. He was not dead. He was not going to die. Eula would be able to confirm in approximately 60 seconds that the cut had found a nerve cluster rather than an artery, and that Gorik would recover full function within a few weeks. But he was not getting up. Darien stepped back. He stood with the sword at his side and looked at Gorik. For a moment, there was nothing in the look that was victory or satisfaction. It was the look of someone checking that a thing they did not want to be worse than necessary was not worse than necessary. Then he crouched, picked up the dropped vibro lance by its handle, and set it down carefully to the side. Not a trophy, just clearing the space. He straightened, turned the blade, and wiped it on the hem of his jacket. Overseer Drath raised his hand from the officiating platform. The arena was silent for the full 3 seconds it took him to deliver the formal end of the bout in 2 languages. Then the sound came. Not a roar. A ripple. It moved through the tiers from the bottom to the top like something physical, different species producing different sounds, but all of them moving in the same direction at the same time. It was not the sound of celebration. It was the sound of 3,800 beings reassessing something they had believed when they walked in. Darian walked toward the exit gate without looking up at any of it. Brennan met him in the corridor beneath the east stand. The young man's hands were not shaking anymore, but they were gripping the medical kit very hard, and his face had the look of someone who had just watched something they did not have vocabulary for yet. He said nothing. He fell in beside Darian, and they walked to the prep hall. Eula was already there. She had the sense to come through the medical passage rather than wait through the crowd. Her equipment was laid out on the bench in the order she would use it, which was how she always worked, because order was a professional habit, and professional habits did not pause for surprise. She examined the arm cut first. It needed sealing a standard field closer that she applied in clean, efficient passes with no commentary. The bruised ribs she assessed by touch, confirmed no breakage, applied a compression wrap. The arm moved better after the sealing. The ribs would ache for days. She worked quietly for some time. Then she said, "I have treated arena fighters for 60 years. Darian said nothing. She finished wrapping the ribs before she continued. "I have seen every weapon. The arena permits. Powered and non-powered. Weapons built for species with more limbs than you. Weapons built specifically to defeat Thirvani plating." She put the wrap down. "I have never seen a non-powered blade used like that." Darian reached over and started wrapping the sword back in its cloth. "It has been used that way for over 1,000 years, he said. "We just never told anyone." She looked at him for a moment. Then she finished packing her equipment. Brennan had been sitting on the far bench through all of this, processing things in the way that young people process things that exceed their current models. He asked, quietly, where Darian had learned to do what he did. Darian told him the name of the tradition. He said it was a sword school that had existed on Earth for more than 1,000 years, refined across generations, of people who had nothing but time and the need to solve a very specific problem in a very small amount of space with nothing but a blade and their own body. He said it had been old before humans knew other species existed. Brennan absorbed this. Then he asked who had taught Darian. Darian tied the second cord on the wrapping. "My grandfather," he said. "His name was Aldrich." That was all he said about it. In Soru's private box, the situation was being processed differently. Soru stood at the viewport looking down at the emptying arena floor. Overseer Drath arrived at the box door personally, which Drath only did for rulings that required a direct witness. He delivered the arena's decision. The original challenge had been filed by Soru's party. The loss belonged to Soru's party. And under station law, the contested cargo debt was cleared. The secondary filing fee was voided. Darian Vale's ship was not subject to claim. Soru said nothing. Drath had been delivering these rulings for a very long time. He left without requiring a response. In the prep hall, Darian sat with the wrapped sword across his knees. The ceiling above him was the same one it had been before the fight. Old metal, riveted panels, a humidity strip along one edge. Nothing had changed. In here, the sand was somewhere else. The crowd was gone. The corridor outside was quiet. He sat for a while in that quiet. Brennan, who had run out of words for the evening, eventually said good night and left. Eula paused at the door and looked back. "The engravings on the blade," she said. "What do they say?" Darian looked at the wrapped cloth. "Names," he said. "Everyone who carried it." He thought about it for a moment. "I'll add mine when I'm done with it." She considered that. Then she nodded once, said nothing else, and left. Darian sat in the quiet prep hall with the sword in his lap and his grandfather's name somewhere beneath the cloth, and the station breathed. Around him, and out in the arena, someone was already raking the sand smooth for the next day's business. 3 days after the bout, a Veldran cultural archivist sent a formal inquiry to the arena authority requesting documentation on the blade style used by the human combatant in the Sora dispute bout. The authority forwarded it to Darian's registered contact address. Darian read it once, wrote back a single paragraph with the name of the tradition and 2 books about it that could be found in any Earth cultural archive, and went back to arranging his next cargo contract. He did not think much of it. He should have. By the end of the week, the Arena Authority had received 14 more similar inquiries. 2 were from military observer offices. 1 was from a Garathi academic institution that studied pre-industrial weapons systems as a subfield of xenoanthropology. 1 was from a private collector of non-powered weapons who had seen the bout recording and watched the relevant sequence 37 times. Brennan found out about the inquiries before Darian did, because Brennan had started checking the station's public communication boards the way you check something that has surprised you once and might do so again. He came to find Darian in the docking sector, where Darian was reviewing freight manifests over a cup of something hot, and told him about the messages. Darian reviewed the manifests. Brennan said, "You don't think that's significant?" "They can read about it," Darian said. "The books exist. You beat a professional Thirvani gladiator with a sword from the pre-contact period," Brennan said, "on a station with 4,000 witnesses and a recording system." "The sword beat him," Darian said. "I was just the person holding it." Brennan sat down across from him. He had been thinking about something for 3 days and had not found the right moment to say it, and he decided this was the moment, whether it was right or not. He said, "I want to learn." Darian looked at him over the manifest screen. Brennan said, "Not necessarily the sword. I know that takes years. I mean, whatever it is behind it. The way you think about space. The way your feet work. The part that..." He stopped. He tried again. "The part that made 3,000 aliens stop laughing." Darian put the manifest down. He looked at Brennan for a while, the way his grandfather used to look at him in the yard in the rain, assessing, not unkind, checking whether the willingness was real or just the aftermath of excitement. It seemed real. "Start with your feet," Darian said. Brennan blinked. "What?" "That's where you start. Footwork. 2 months of nothing else. Not the blade. Not the form. Just how you move your weight from one position to another, without announcing it." He picked the manifest back up. "If you're still interested after 2 months, come back." Brennan nodded slowly. He seemed to understand this was not a dismissal. He left to find a clear section of deck to practice in. Eula came to the docking bay on the last morning. Darian was running final checks on his ship, a cargo hauler called the Aldrich, which no one had ever asked him why he named it that. She arrived without announcement and stood at the base of the loading ramp with her hands in the pockets of her medical coat. She had brought something, a small scanner, palm-sized, with a new casing over the internal components. She held it out. "I modified it," she said. "It reads subsurface anatomy on Thirvani. Classification species. Joint gap mapping." She paused. "It took me 2 days. I had time." Darian came down the ramp and took it. He turned it over in his hands. He had not asked her for this. She had not told him she was making it. It was the kind of thing that required someone to decide, on their own, that a thing was worth doing and then go do it. He had met very few people like that. Across all the species he had encountered, and the ones he had met, he tended to remember. "Thank you," he said. "It works on 7 other species in the same classification group," she said. "I included a key." She was not giving him a weapon. She was giving him information, organized and made accessible. It was what she did. It was what she had been doing since she told him where the joint gaps were, and before that when she flagged the bout as medical observer when she did not have to. He put the scanner in his jacket pocket. She said, "Are you going to keep doing this? The arena, I mean." "No," he said. "I have freight to move." "And the sword?" He looked at her for a moment. "It comes with me." She accepted this. They did not say anything further that needed to be said. She walked back toward the station proper. He walked back up the ramp. The station's understanding of what had happened in the arena varied by who you asked. Most aliens still thought the blade was a curiosity. Many of them still found it faintly amusing that a human had walked into the grand arena with something so old and so simple and so far from what the galaxy considered a real weapon. The novelty items were still being sold on the upper concourse. The version of events that circulated in casual conversation tended toward the idea that the human had gotten lucky or that Gorik had an off night. or that the circumstances were unusual in ways that would not repeat. They were wrong on all three counts, but they were comfortable with the interpretation, and so it persisted. A smaller number understood what they had actually seen. Overseer Drath wrote a single-page addendum to the bout's official record in the Garathi tradition of noting events of instructional value. He wrote that the human combatant had demonstrated a complete weapons discipline of significant depth and age, operating from a set of principles that the arena's cataloged fighting systems did not contain. He filed it in the section of the record that arena officials read and the public did not. He had been doing this job for a very long time. He had learned that the things worth noting were rarely the things that drew the most attention at the time. Darian's ship cleared the docking clamps an hour after Eula left. He ran the exit sequence, set the navigation, and leaned back in the pilot seat. The sword was in its cloth wrapping, secured in the bracket beside the seat where it always was. Through the viewport, Varith crossing fell away. Decks and docking arms and lights, slowly receding into a shape, and then into a point, and then into the general background of things he had been somewhere near. He did not watch it go. There was a manifest on the screen. New contract, different system, cargo that needed moving. He had gotten it that morning from a broker who had not yet heard about the arena and treated him like any other hauler, which was how he preferred to be treated. He read through the manifest. Somewhere behind him, weeks of travel away, the inquiries were accumulating. The records were being filed. The data was being quietly entered into systems that tracked things like combat capability and weapons knowledge and what species could do in specific conditions. None of it would produce anything obvious for a long time. It rarely did. It just sat there, the way certain things sit in the record, adding up. The stars ahead were the same stars they always were. The blade was already clean.